Hi, I'm Selena Woodward, and as I stated in the podcasts that I've been releasing this week, I am here live every Thursday night to answer questions. Now, the Reflective Teacher podcast is really new. We literally have given out 2 episodes, one last week and one just yesterday. And the purpose of the Reflective Teacher podcast is to share stories, ideas, and, real good tips and tricks around how to reflect on your practice whilst gathering evidence for your portfolios. We've done 2 episodes, as I say. The first episode, which was released last week, can be found at edufolios.org/001. Now, in that episode, I started talking about goal setting and thinking about how, as educators, we go about that. I know my history as an English teacher, usually I'd be given a piece of paper with 2 goals already written on it and asked what PD I'd like to do this year so I could make that the 3rd and have a budget to go on that PD. And honestly, that's really not the best way to set ourselves goals, because even if we had a really realistic goal on there, something we were really passionate about, that piece of paper then just gets put in a filing cabinet until the next review period. And that's not the best way to deal with it. I haven't connected with why I have that goal, how I'm going to meet that goal, or anything. And so in the first podcast, I talked about an alternative way of setting goals. I'd actually learned this from a podcast I listened to by a gentleman called James Wedmore. And I was so inspired by his podcast about doing that personally that I tried to put a twist on it for teaching. Now, every time I make a podcast, I will do my best to create what I call a freebie. Now, this piece of paper that I have in my hand is available for download. You head to edufolios.org/001 and you'll be able to grab this document. This document is called Setting Goals. Is that enough for success? Is it? And the podcast walks you through some ideas. And, just to support you with that, the steps that I describe in that podcast are laid out here in this freebie. Everything you need to make sure that you know what your goals are, and most importantly, that you can then turn that into a really strong piece of evidence for your portfolio, whether that be at proficient, graduate, highly accomplished, or wherever you want to go. It will be the first post in a story of practice, because you're going to track how you meet that goal as you move forward throughout the term or the year, depending on the goal. Every single one has a set of questions to ask you which standards you think you might be covering. So it makes it easy. Obviously, if you have an EduFolio, you're used to that practice. It's built into our system. But if you don't, then this document will even help you with that. The second podcast that I did that was released only yesterday was talking about the difference between a graduate portfolio and a proficient one. And I chose to do this podcast because I've been on the phone this week to a lot of wonderful people having a chat about something I'm currently working on that should be coming up in the next few months. And I will slowly reveal that further down the line. Those of you in the know, you can spread the rumors. But basically, one of the things that came up was that it's actually really hard to know where to start. That a lot of you have created a graduate portfolio and have gone through that process at university, but don't necessarily know how to move that forward and what that might look like for full registration or proficiency. So in that podcast, in 15 minutes, I just talk about the difference. What is the difference between a graduate and a proficient portfolio? Now, I talk about the language, I talk about the zones of impact, I talk about how you can make sure that you're gathering that evidence in a stress-free way. We do not, at EduFolios, want you to be waiting until you get your letter and then coming back and having a panic. What we want is for you to be proactive, not reactive, and gathering your evidence slowly and steadily. That is how you get a really beautiful story of who you are as a teacher, what your strengths are, how you're growing. Now, of course, there's a freebie for that too. Here it is, freebie number 2. And this one's called What's the Difference Between Graduate and Proficient? Now, this freebie contains some visuals that sort of support what I'm talking about. including a lovely wheel that talks to you about the difference between the impact that you're going to make in those two sectors. It gives you some close exercises, so while you're listening you can really get those key points into your mind. And an example of a comparison between a graduate focus area and a proficient one, just so you can see how those changes move. I talk about the kinds of artifacts that you'll be wanting to collect, and I've got a checklist in here for you to think about, as well as always the 7 standards and what you think you're going to hit. The example in here focuses very much on standard 1, focus area 1, so 1.1, and that one's all about looking at the characteristics of your students and being able to meet their needs. And that's going to take a story. That's going to have to start with a control. So it's the perfect time right now at the beginning of the year, when you're getting to know your students, to write a reflection post about who you have in your class and what you've noticed about them, what their needs might be. You might want to make some guesses about how you might be able to use those characteristics to support them. You might even want to share a plan that you've got. And then a few weeks later, you come back because you've implemented some of that, and you talk about what's different and what's changed, what the impact has been. Now, you'll see a pattern here, but if you want to grab the freebie for the second episode, then you will need to head to edufolios.org/002. That will take you to the page that talks about graduate to proficient and gives you access to this freebie to help support you. Now, I'm very aware that tonight is Valentine's Day, and I am very, very happy that most of you will be outside eating chocolate and having a wonderful meal and romantic walks, or just watching Netflix and eating ice cream, whatever you're choosing to do. Unfortunately for me, I've decided to give up sugar, and I'm on that I quit sugar diet, so I'll just be eating rice cakes tonight and having a coffee. Maybe I'll treat myself to some cheese. But either way, I know that you're going to have a great night tonight, and I want you to know that love is definitely in the air for teachers. We understand how hard you work, and we love that you are dedicated professionals who are really, really keen to keep growing. As I say in the podcast, the best learners make the best teachers. And if you're someone who is reflecting on who you are and what you're doing in your classroom, then your students and your community are incredibly lucky that you're part of their children's lives. Right, I'll leave you to it. Enjoy Valentine's Day. Please feel free to leave any questions underneath this video. Know where to go and find the podcasts, edufolios.org/001 for the podcast about setting goals, and edufolios.org/002 for the podcast about graduate to proficient. And make sure you come back and let me know how you got on. I'll be here again next week, same time on Thursday. I'll take care.